Life is all about relationships. Lovers, family, body, or money. How satisfied you are can be completely explained by how you relate to things around you. This is Sophie Jaffe, and together with my husband, Dr. Adi Jaffe, we are here to explore and teach you how to maximize your relationships and achieve a happier life. Let's get ignited.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe.
And I'm Sophie Jaffe.
And we're here to talk about one of my favorite topics today, and guaranteed you've heard me talk about this here before, and that is
Addiction.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny because whether I teach statistics at UCLA or whether I'm talking to potential clients or whether I'm doing things on my course or sharing things on Facebook or whatever it is, I realize that probably 80% of the effort that I put out into the world has to do with this problem. And I struggle with this sometimes because it can feel so limited in some ways, right? Because so much of my focus is on helping people who have alcohol or drug problems, or now we've expanded that to porn and sex and gambling and all this stuff. But it can be difficult. It can be challenging.
I think this is your dharma too. It's what you're here to do.
Yeah.
It's your... Yeah, dharma is just like your, it's not karma, it's your dharma. It's your purpose.
Yeah, like you're the reason. The
reason you're here. So even though it's like the most difficult thing in the world for you, it's also the most authentic
Yeah,
reason.
And I know because it's like, I love it.
Yeah.
At the core, I love it.
And you transform people's lives. You're really good at it. It's not just like a self-fulfilling thing.
No, God knows it's not a self-fulfilling
No, but
thing.
it's not like, it's not just like, oh, I just love it. I get up every day and I just love my job. It's so much deeper than that. It's the deep sort of love. It's the deep, passionate. You
see some of the emails, and what drives me are the changes. What drives me is when I see somebody's life being affected. And but at the same time, this is something I really struggle with because we haven't really talked about it at all on this podcast, but I used to be a drug addict, and it started with weed and alcohol when I was in high school, and I became one of those daily, all-day stoners and people who would drink every single night.
This was like college.
Yeah,
right?
so
like
high school into college, and then I stopped smoking weed around the age of like 21 because it made me paranoid all the time, and you know that. But I still drank. We
have some really good paranoid stories for you, by the way, coming up
in
future episodes. Some amazing paranoid Adion marijuana stories. It's just the best.
It's it's fun. It's fun for everybody except for me while I'm going through it.
Now I'm itching to tell a specific story.
I know. We'll get to it. I don't think we'll get to it.
Just think edibles. Just think not being aware of taking an edible,
eating like 10 doses.
Yeah. So just having like two full cookies.
No, just one. I just one.
Oh, it was just one?
Yeah, it was just one. We'll get to it another time. I want to get to this piece to it. But so 15 years ago, got arrested after being essentially a meth addict for 5 years. And those of you who are listening who've ever known meth, that's kind of like the hardcore shit, right? That's like, it's that and heroin.
Heroin and meth, yeah.
Yeah, it's like those are the gold medals of drug addiction. And mine ended with an arrest and time in jail and a year in rehab. And I went through a very traditional sort of way of getting to the other side of it.
Oh, just a quick PS. He wasn't just a drug addict. He was also a drug dealer.
Sure.
So that was part of the arrest. It wasn't just that you were using.
Yeah, no. A whole SWAT team arrest. If you've never heard any of my story, by the way, The Abstinence Myth, which is the book that I just wrote, is coming out. If you go to theabstinenceMyth.com, you can get on the list and you get the first chapter right away. So that's important to say. But SWAT arrest, got directed to rehab because my lawyer told me, if you don't do this, you're going to prison for a really, really long time. So I said, let's go to rehab. But the most traditional rehab, some of you have no idea what I'm talking about, but you've seen it in the shows, right? So AA-based rehab, you'd go to meetings, all this stuff. And I was 100% sober for about 3 years as I was slowly building my life back. And it just didn't feel right. I knew I had to do it to get out of prison for the rest of my life. And I did. And I knew my life was messed up. I had no relationship with my family. I was an asshole. And but after like 2 years, it started just feeling off. And I realized that it was feeling off, and I was scared because that's the only thing they tell you is possible. And they literally tell you, if you leave this framework, you will die, end up in an institution, or become addicted again.
Let me just add that he's not talking about, just in case you're not familiar with the AA modality, he's not talking about he really wanted to go use meth again. In AA, if you have a meth problem, if you have a coke problem, if you have an alcohol problem,
a porn problem,
you're not allowed to do anything. You can't do any substance because you are a danger to yourself and the world, and you're an addict.
Well, and it all falls under this umbrella of being an addict. And those of you who've seen my TEDx talk, there's one little line that I say, my name is Adi and I'm not an addict. And anybody who's a 12-stepper understands what I'm saying by that. But part of what I'm saying in it is 2 years sober, I started thinking, you know what, there's much more to me than just an addict. And I started really wrestling with that. And I had nobody to talk to about it. I had a sponsor. I was in a master's program by that point, studying psychology. And I started talking to my parents and my sponsor and all these people about essentially running what's known as the AA experiment, kind of like leaving the group and trying to figure out this stuff on my own. Long story short, it's 12 years later. I'm all good. People who know me know I drink socially. It's not a problem. I've gotten too drunk a handful of times in the last 12 years. And it's not a problem at all in my life.
Normal. You're normal.
Like a normal human.
Yeah.
But during that whole time, being the person that I am, and I can't just shut up about things and just do it on my own, I kind of started this crusade. And the crusade is around expanding people's understanding of what addiction is and what the potential outcomes from it are. And I've been called names during it. I've been told that I'm in the middle of a relapse and, that they'll save me a seat. And I also, by the way, have really understanding and loving 12-step friends who totally see that I'm good. And, they rationalize it in whatever way they rationalize it. But the Abstinence Myth book, the Ignited Recovery stuff, I got involved in harm reduction. And there's people like Andrew Tatarsky and Alan Marlatt, who's past tense, my co-founder for the rehab that I used to run, Alternatives, Mark Kern. And a lot of these other people, Stanton Peele in New York, who've done a lot of really amazing work over 30 to 40 years to allow me to get to this place. And yet they're still seen as renegades, right? A lot of people still look at them as heretics, et cetera. And I went the UCLA route and got my PhD. And part of the reason was, I didn't realize it at the time, but when I got out, it was like, I have to change the way that this treatment system works. And there's so many reasons, right? 25 to 30 million addicts in this country, and only about 10% of them get help every year. That literally means that there's more than 20 million addicts a year in this country who are not getting help. And the problem is that up to this moment, the way we normally talk about it, and Jeff Sessions, by the way, is doing it right now with his Time magazine. That's our attorney general, by the way, for those who don't know. We blame the addicts. We look at them when we say, well, treatment doesn't work because addicts are lying sacks of you-know-what who are no good. And we need to arrest them. We need to get them to not use the drugs. They're stupid. Their brains are so disaffected that they can't think for themselves. And that's the way we treat addiction in this country right now. And there are 20-some million people at least a year who are not getting help because of it. And what makes matters so crazily terrible is there are about 150 to 200,000 people a year dying. I'm not including cigarettes, by the way, dying between alcohol and the other drugs every year in this country. And we keep blaming them for it. So for me, this is a real crusade. And you can obviously hear just by the passion I have in my voice about it, why it is that I get up every morning and my first thought is, how many more people can I help that day in whatever way I do it? And this is a really, really, really long intro to the guest that we have today, which is Annie Grace. And I met Annie actually at a harm reduction conference. So Annie is an author, never got a PhD, never got a master's in psychology, nothing like that. But she was an executive who was really struggling with her drinking. She talks about that in the episode too. Really, really struggling with it. Did not want to go to AA, did not identify at all with being an alcoholic or an addict. And she wanted to find another way. And she did, but unlike a lot of people, because there are millions of people who do that, they figure out their way out of problematic drinking on their own and they either quit or they keep drinking without a problem. She decided to go write a book about it. And the book is called This Naked Mind. And it's one of the most popular books about drinking problems that there is. And she now has online courses. Actually, she and I work together on, I think I'm on her course and I'm trying to get her to do a bonus for my course. But what I loved about it was here's this woman who overcame her alcohol problem on her own and started speaking out about the way that she did it to help people. And in the meantime, started a movement. Like there's like 1 million people on her mailing list who have benefited from her method. And the reason I want to talk about it here is I know, because you guys have sent us messages, I know that some of you listening have family members or you yourself are struggling. And I don't want to be, I never signed up for it, and that's not my point, to be kind of the example holder of this is the way I recovered, therefore you need to do it my way. That's not at all my message. I have Ignited Recovery. You can go there and check out my method of doing things.
It's just another way. To me, it's just another way. Like, if you feel sick, there are probably 23 to 45 different ways that you can heal from that cold or from that sickness or from that sore throat. There are a lot of different modalities you can do to heal. Right. You can go to your normal practitioner and have them prescribe you antibiotics. You can gargle oregano oil every morning. You can do any number of things. Yet with addiction, there's one way right now that's popular, and that's the AA modality. And that doesn't work for everyone. It does work for some people. Great. Yeah. Awesome. If that works, fantastic. Same with weight loss.
And it's also so extreme. Like you mentioned the cold. Like imagine if every time you got a cold, somebody said,
you have to get on antibiotics.
Or like, we got to put you in the hospital in an isolation ward for 30 days.
Exactly.
Nobody would go tell anybody that they have a cold because they have a job and they can't. And I know some of you listening right now are saying, yeah, but that's not what addicts are. And I say, that might be true for some people. But like I've met these kids, a kid who smokes too much weed in high school gets sent to some wilderness camp for 3 months. And we overreact 90% of the time. And I'll tell you this, and if you watch my webinar, I post pictures from emails that I get. Sophie just saw one this morning. The people I work with are not, I've smoked an extra joint this year and I feel bad about it. Like I get blackout drinkers who black out 5, 6, 7 times a week, and they get help in an entirely different way than what everybody else has said. And by the way, half of these people have been to rehab over and over and over and it hasn't worked.
The 12-step model.
The point is, there are so many different ways to get better. And we have to expand the conversation. And I know some of you are really clicking with this right now, and some of you are mad at me, and that's okay. We have to expand the conversation. It's not about me proving that my method is right. It's about us continuously exposing the people who are struggling to like a menu, the biggest menu you can imagine.
Just staying open to not being rigid in one way to heal in anything.
Yeah. And so I'm proud of Annie for going through that work. Now she's made a business out of it, but that wasn't true initially. She was a marketing expert and, got her book started, and now she got picked up. So it's actually really, really great. Since we recorded this episode, she's been published by Penguin. Like, really amazing things are happening. And for me, this is all part of increasing the awareness around this and the problem and helping people. I get a lot of DMs personally from people who are listening to this or have seen other stuff saying, I love the message of positivity, that change is possible because I'm struggling or my dad has been struggling for 40 years or whatever that is, and they haven't found help. So I really, really hope that you guys like this interview. And again, listen for the opportunities, listen for the things that are done differently and that are different than maybe the traditional ways you've been taught to think about addiction and alcoholism and all these other things.
And share this episode with someone that might want to listen to it.
Yeah, that would be great.
You could really change someone's life. So being open, staying open.
Yeah. And
receptive.
And I think that leads really, really well into the relationship tip for the week, because the relationship tip for the week is to embrace your inner shadow, both yours and your partner's. And the reason I say that is, and we get into it in this discussion, but Sophie, you and I have talked about this with a lot of our guests on the podcast. We all have sides of ourselves that we don't like. Our shadow part, as Jung would call it. But we have a very limited number of options of what to do with that. One of them is to try to hide it as much as we can and run away from it full speed. And some of our shadows, by the way, are dark. Some of our shadows are really crazy, right? Like, I have clients who were sexually assaulted for years or decades as children. That is dark. That is so much pain that is hiding inside of you. And yet, you will not be able to outrun it. No matter how hard you try, no matter how many drugs you put in your system, no matter what else you do to try to not acknowledge that that piece exists in you.
It's there.
It is there, and
forever.
It will haunt you unless you take the other choice, and that is acknowledge it, uncover it, and then accept it. And the acceptance can be long, it can be hard, or it can be easy. But once you do that acceptance, you're no longer running away from the shadow, but instead what you're saying is, oh, that problem, that issue, that experience that I had left marks. And it left marks in this way. I have a hard time trusting people, or I get really easily triggered to anxiety, or I'm depressed regularly. Whatever that is for you, I have a perfectionist sense because I feel like I always have to be perfect. Whatever that is, now you can start doing the work on the actual end result rather than trying to run away from the original sin. Because if you keep trying to run away from it, you'll never fix the actual problem.
And we all have wounds. It's not like your thing feels like it's the biggest thing because it's your thing. We all have really dark experiences, and it's all your own perspective. Yeah. So, it's something that like your parents' divorce when you were 4 years old may feel like the biggest tragedy and something that you are super wounded from. You're still trying to heal. You're still trying to run away from. Your dad leaving you when you were young, abuse. There's so many layers, and it's all your own perspective. But if you can own it and see it as a gift, a learning opportunity,
and have a partner that you
you
can literally turn to and say, and Sophie, and you and I do this on a regular basis, to just say, oh my God, that thing is coming back up for me. But to know that your partner is there for you, because part of the reason we don't talk to people about this is we're afraid that if you know my truth, you'll run away too.
Exactly. So finding someone that loves all sides to you.
Yep. And doing that, having that service for your partner and allowing them to be their true self.
One of my favorite quotes, I don't actually remember what the origin was, but my girlfriend Rochelle actually taught this. I think it was her Koya teacher that said this, but that the definition of grace is holding in your left hand all the beauty, all the light, all the things you're proud of, and then equally holding in your right hand all your darkness, all your shadows, all the negativities, all of the pain and trauma, and equally holding them. And that's the definition of grace.
Yeah.
So not just personally, but definitely once you own it yourself and do the work to uncover all of that and let it be a part of your you-ness, but then finding someone who you can tell those things to without shame, and they love you, not even just anyway, but even more.
Well, and look at how far you can actually end up taking it, right? That episode that we did where we told everything.
Yeah.
That, by being able to accept your shadow that much, you end up actually being able to affect other people
and help,
who are not part of your life at all, because they see what you've been through. They see that you walk with your head held high and understanding your dark and your, it's not like we're celebrating the darkness. It's just that we understand the role that it played. And then other people benefit. Other people write us saying, oh my God, I'm going through the exact same thing you guys went through 7-8 years ago, and I thought there's no way to get better, and this gives me all the hope in the world. So when you get to the other side, and I always use this really funny analogy, and we can end with this. I know it's cheesy, guys. Hold on with me through this. The end of 8 Mile, the Eminem movie.
Love.
How does he kind of come out on top? By exposing all the things that everybody else considers as a weakness in him. He neutralizes the ammunition. He takes the punch out of anybody who would try to put him down, because he knows it. He already knows it. Instead of running away from it and trying to pretend like it's not true, he owns it. We've done it to the best of our ability. We know you can do it. And once you discover that little secret and you stop running away from your shadow and can accept it in yourself and then in your partner, some incredible things can happen.
Absolutely.
So with that, hold on for a few more seconds, and Annie is coming your way. I hope you really enjoy it. I'm the only one interviewing her in this one, so excuse me for the fact that you don't get Sophie's awesome insight in this one. Bye.
Enjoy.
This episode of the Ignited podcast is brought to you by Philosophy Superfoods. The Philosophy offers cleanses and other nutritional products that are unlike any of the other supplements and detoxification programs on the market. Why? Because they actually nourish the body with whole, live, nutrient-rich foods instead of depriving you and leaving you hungry. Have you ever tried a cleanse only to find out that you can't make it through a whole day because you're starving? Ever try a superfood shake that made you nauseous because it was so disgusting you'd rather not eat? The Philosophy Fix All That with a simple set of offerings that load up your body with nutrients while actually tasting good. Makes sense, right? Each of the Philosophy superfood and protein blends is vegan, raw, gluten-free, and has absolutely no filler ingredients. With over 15,000 satisfied customers, including some of the world's biggest celebrities like George Clooney, Gerard Butler, Lea Michele, and over 10 years of experience, this is the best stuff you can get. To buy some or find out more info, go to our website, thephilosophy.com.
Today with Annie Grace. I met Annie at a conference, an addiction conference called the Harm Reduction Conference. And I was really excited to be there, first of all, because it was one of the first times I got to get together with a group of people who had this notion that one of the ways to deal with drugs and alcohol is not to just tell people that they've got to stop doing drugs and alcohol, which doesn't seem to be working all that well for us. But they were thinking of more innovative ways, and had been thinking for actually decades of ways that are more innovative to deal with this problem that, I was struggling with helping my clients at Alternatives at the time. Annie and I met. I don't even remember how we met. How did we meet, Annie?
I think I tracked you down because I was really interested in your talk. Yeah.
Did you come to my Dr. Kern's little panel thing? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think maybe we talked right after that. Cool. So, and then we ended up for about 2 hours just sitting on the ground talking. You had shown me your book and all the stuff that you'd done, which was really cool. And actually, I think the book that you had shown me, the book that you wrote, which is, what's the name of the book?
This Naked Mind.
This Naked Mind was the first book I know of to discuss specifically, I'm not going to say a non-abstinence approach, but a non-traditional approach into help from drug and alcohol problems from a first-person view. So there are now some academic books about this, Dr. Foot's books, and Andrew Tatarski's written on this, and Stan Peele has written. But from the personal kind of point of view of here's what I did and went through it, I think that's the first one that I'd seen. It was really, really cool. And then we ended up talking about, I introduced moderation approaches, and you were really kind of intrigued by that. And we talked about medications and all this. I mean, we literally talked about everything for about 2 hours. It was really cool. And we recorded a couple of interviews. I interviewed you for my thing, you interviewed me for yours. And since then, we kept in touch, just, seeing what's kind of happening in the world. So why don't you fill everybody in on, I want to know, how did you get there? I mean, I heard the story, but I want everybody to know, how did you get to this place based on where you were to now where this is your job?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think you just recently have found out that this conversation that you and I had basically changed a lot of things for me. Like it really changed, even though I think I was, if you look at the black and white, I was certainly more in the middle of the spectrum. Yeah. But some of the things that you had revealed to me about what prevents people from even asking the simple question, am I drinking too much? And the statistic around that and some of your personal studies that you had done at UCLA, it blew my mind to the point where I've really almost shifted a little bit in terms of things that I'm putting out, which is really cool.
Very cool.
It was a brilliant conversation. So I think for me, my drinking really started in corporate life. I wasn't a huge drinker in college. I wasn't a huge drinker. Even when we got married, I remember having a glass of wine and really just wanting to be present for the evening. And then I started in corporate life, the youngest vice president of a huge multinational company at the age of 26. And I was literally taken aside by my boss and said, hey, the deals get done at the bar. I mean, that's like the golf course of today. And, you need to show up there, because I hadn't been, because I just wasn't really interested in it. And, but I was very interested in my career. And so I made a big specific effort to go to the bar and to be really good at drinking. So I do things like I'd drink a glass of wine and a glass of water just to end up being able to last longer. And at some points during my journey, I would drink a few glasses of wine, realize, whoa, that's too much. I'm going to start to sound silly. And I'd go to the bathroom and I'd go about very bulimic style, even though I'm not bulimic, to keep drinking, just to be able to maintain the tolerance that, everybody on me was. I was 26. They were in their 40s.
And
I was a woman. They were men.
This was literally something that was pushed on you, but suggested from the higher ups.
Yeah, and interestingly, a vlog 2 days ago, just kind of about my story, and it got 7,000 views, and I got an email from HR, this company, which I will name, saying that I need to be really careful not to name them. I checked with my lawyer. That's not true. I could name them all I want, but they're espousing that they're so concerned about their employees' wellness and yada, yada, yada. And to this, I mean, I put hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of alcohol through my expenses.
Sure.
I remember once I put $5 worth of candy and it got picked up by HR, but the hundreds of dollars I put through, not only wining and dining my team, but, you know, networking events, like never, nobody blinked an eye. It was so much of the corporate, and nobody's to blame. Like, I want to be clear on that.
Sure.
Nobody's to blame. It's what it is. Corporations, especially international corporations.
Hundreds, I would say by now, hundreds of people between emails and actual clients who tell me the story. This is one of the reasons why they have a hard time even conceptualizing, like, I'm going to stop drinking. They go, if I stop drinking, I lose my job. And I might not lose my job because I stopped drinking, but I'm going to lose my job because I can't close the deals that I was closing before. And then I'll lose my job because the deals all has to do with going out and drinking. And some of them are like open bar, top level, you know, executives in a room. This guy was telling me once they had done an event, open bar, ping pong, like room. And you just hung out and drank and played ping pong. And the deal was, you know, so you get to know all your customers, close deals.
Yep. It's crazy. I mean, it was such a pivotal part, like such an important part of every deal and huge deals, like many multi-million-dollar deals that were closed or drinks all the time. And so kind of fast forward a decade of that lifestyle, and alcohol does. And I realized it wasn't just at work that I was drinking too much. It was, and I remember having this moment. I was sitting in Heathrow international trip and just really feeling like, wow, I'd spent the entire week boozing it up. I was about to go home to my 2 young children, and I was going to give them the worst of myself, not the best of myself. And it was just this moment of like, I'm not doing what I want to be doing. And so I decided that I wanted to change something. But I had a situation that was a little bit unique, as I knew some stuff about AA, but not from firsthand knowledge, which of course, secondhand knowledge is probably the most dangerous. But my brother had spent some time in mandatory AA because he had spent some time in prison. Okay. And he had told me that, you know, you really had to admit that you were powerless and that you were an alcoholic. And I felt really powerful, to be honest with you. Like, I was traveling all over the world. I was really young in my career. I was doing great. I had this amazing family. Like, my life was really together apart from my drinking, and I felt really powerful. And so admitting I was powerless, it wasn't for me. Like, I was like, that doesn't ring true to me. And so I looked up in literature and I found a brochure, which might be dated now. I can't say for sure, but I have it and it said alcohol was an allergy. And I'm science-minded, and sure, there's a very small number of people who are allergic to alcohol, but you can pretty much Google it and find out that alcohol addiction is not based on an allergy. So for me, AA just crumbled in that moment. Like, there was not the backbone of it being an allergy was like, I couldn't, there was nothing that they were going to be able to say to change my mind shift because I didn't trust the premise. So I knew that wasn't for me. And so I sat there and I was like, okay,
I have a quick question. This is a big thing. I mean, for a lot of people, when society says something, even if some of it doesn't ring true, there's this bias. They just go, well, this is what everybody told me is the right thing, so I'm just going to keep going forward. Is that a thing for you always? That you kind of, no matter what premises are set in front of you, you do your own research, and then you go, yeah, I'm going to buy into that, or no, I'm not going to?
Yeah, my dad. So I was raised in this tiny little, no electricity, no running water log cabin at, 11,000 feet. You had a snowmobile to get there in the wintertime. And my dad, born and raised Jewish in the Bronx, decided he just wanted to give up a huge film career and everything and become a hermit and live off the land, and raised me without television or running water. And so from the beginning, I was taught to question everything. Okay. And so there was nothing that he his whole paradigm, of like the Bronx and the city and the career, like he just like up and planted himself.
I mean, by itself, that's, not everybody, and I'm not even going to say whether that's a positive or a negative thing, but that's a huge element in terms of shifting how you are in life. Because like I said, most people, it sounds weird to maybe people like you and a little bit me, but I'd probably go with convention a little bit more than you, it sounds like. That, this idea of you can always question what people give you is this innate ability to exert control over your surroundings. Now, sometimes I can lead you in trouble because you end up questioning things that maybe work well for you. But it sounds like in this situation, it created an entirely alternate, non-traditional way to address your alcohol problems for you.
Yeah, I mean, there were many instances. I spent a lot of time in the principal's office, and I questioned why I had to sit through certain calculus lectures, and there was lots of ways that it was not the best. But in this instance, I'll have to tell about this other little part of my story, whereas I was having very severe back pain after the birth of my second son, and I was trying everything to get through it. I was trying everything you can imagine. Just suffice it to it was 3 years of this, and finally I was introduced to a book called Healing Back Pain by Dr. John Sarno. And in the beginning of the book, he says, you know what, your back pain, if it's undiagnosable, if it jumps around, if nothing can cure it, it may very well be repressed emotions, that your body does not want you to feel these emotions because they're too painful, so it distracts you with pain. And it says, now you can understand this consciously, like say, okay, sounds a bit woo-woo, but maybe this is true. Yeah. But the truth is I have to walk you through this 300-page book in order to get you to understand this concept, because I need to speak to your unconscious desires, your unconscious mind. And so I was like, all right, whatever, I don't believe this is going to work, but I'm going to read it. And it's great because you can be skeptical and still read something like that. And I think that's a really cool thing, because I was certainly skeptical. But by the end of this book, my back pain went away. And it was the first time in my life where I was like, oh, wow, my mind is so powerful. Yeah. And I was just like blown away. And so I formed this theory in that tunnel that I had this very conscious desire to drink less, but I had this lifetime of unconscious conditioning, both through my own experiences of actually having a drink and actually having it relax me, and through, media, parents, friends, everybody telling me that alcohol relaxed me or whatever the reason was. And they were at odds. And so I had this cognitive dissonance and this argument inside myself. And I said, if I could end the argument, I could end this struggle. And so I set out on basically a year's worth of research into all sorts of things. I found different doctors. I got in touch with some people that work for Dr. Sarno and just said, how can I do this? How can I end the argument? And at the end of that year's research, and I didn't stop drinking at the time, and I think that was what was really interesting, is that it was never for me about stopping drinking. It was always for me the question of, how can I find peace? How can I end this internal conflict? Because right now, I'm arguing with myself, and that's so painful.
I tell that to all my clients. I tell it to people I work with and people who email me, whether it's opiates or meth or cocaine or alcohol. I go, look, I understand you're coming to me for those things, but I just want to let you know before we even get started, it's not about those things for the most part. We're going to figure out what it's about together, but it's not about what you think it's about. Those are the things you're using to help you deal with whatever it's really about.
Right.
Some people really don't like hearing that, because it's so much simpler to think that if I can just stop drinking, everything will be fine. Inevitably, they figure out pretty quickly that once they stop drinking, everything is not fine. They're actually just now unable to deal with whatever is under. And sometimes that's a good thing, because it kind of brings it up to the top and you get to deal with it. But it sounds like you, through back pain, were actually able to realize, wait, there's more. If I'm emotionally making myself hurt, there's got to be more stuff that I'm doing to myself to hurt myself through all this internal conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think for me, the question has always been, and I've always said, even to the very last page of my book, like, this can't be about rules for me. As soon as I say, hi, I'm Annie Grace, and I will never have another alcoholic drink again, I will be like, oh gosh, where's the vodka? Like that is for me. I've been very careful, and I have no desire to drink. I don't want to drink. I don't intend to have a drink, but I'm never going to put that rule on myself. I'm never going to say never again, because as soon as I do, it creates this reaction inside of me that I feel trapped. And so that has not been what it's about. Did you learn that through
your research, or did you just figure that out internally?
Oh, that's just, I think it just is kind of, I've never been able to go on a diet. I've never been able to, have a daily practice of meditation. I always need to feel like I'm doing this by choice in the moment and have the option. But as soon as something feels like imposed, even if I'm imposing it on myself,
totally.
And I think it's human nature. It's certainly my nature.
It is. But some of the seminal research on this is actually really interesting. It was done in Florida. I don't remember the name of the researcher right now, but they looked at something really simple, and they looked at what happens to people's desires and ratings of laundry detergent. And they went into a store, they had everybody rate the different detergents that were on the shelf, and then they took one of the brands off the shelf. And then they came back and they had everybody rate it again. And people increased their rating. They ended up liking the one that was removed from the shelves better once it was no longer available. And there's a lot of follow-up research to that, but it's so interesting to think of the original thing. I mean, kids have done this their entire life, so we know it, right? You tell somebody they can't have something and they want it more. And I remember when we were sitting and talking, I said, I don't understand why that's a rule. I'm working on a book right now that kind of tries to make this point. When you tell somebody they can never have something again, their brain shifts into a different mode, which is that thing is better than I thought it was. I want it more. Sometimes, to some extent, I need it more than I thought I did. And now it's in like panic mode for no reason other than the fact that we've exacerbated that by telling them they can never have it. So you took that off the shelf for yourself.
Yeah. And I just continue to do that. Like I think that about 4 months after I stopped drinking, I had this moment of, it was very euphoric for me at first because I kind of ended the cognitive dissonance. I remember ending my research and I walked out of my office and I told my husband, I was like, if you want to get drunk with me tonight's night, because I think I'm done. Like, I don't have any desire. I don't want to drink anymore. So we went and we got drunk. I got very sick, which was probably kind of a blessing, on much less than I normally drink, which I think must have been the universe just sort of giving me the, you are now knighted a non-drinker, because I really have taken your desire for this. But then 4 months later, I started really questioning it. I was like, okay, what is like, do I want to do this? Like, am I really missing out on something? I feel like I've done a lot of, for me, the internal thing was really just getting a hold of my negative thinking. I mean, that's been the pivotal thing for me, is how can I quiet my mind? How can I quiet the incessant chatter of you should be doing more, you should be more, you should have achieved more, whatever it is. And I'd done a lot of that work, but then I was feeling like, well, is alcohol missing? Like, am I sacrificing really just, laughing really hard with my friends? Like, what am I sacrificing? So this wasn't my original idea, but I had heard of this idea of doing sort of an experiment on yourself, where I literally locked myself in a room with my iPhone on a tripod and a bottle of wine. And this was 4 months after I had stopped. So I had no physical symptoms of withdrawals. And I just filmed myself getting drunk. And I had 2 bottles of wine. I only ended up finishing 1 before I fell asleep. And I went into the night thinking, okay, this is going to be great. Like, I knew I needed to have a very controlled environment, because I wanted to isolate the alcohol from, the social event, or if there was music or TV or friends or whatever. But equally, I thought it was going to be fun, like, because my conditioning had told me it was going to be fun. So I was like, okay, so I was like, I'm going to get drunk and I'm going to have all these things I want to do. Like, even if it's just my room, I'm going to like have a really good night. And I still haven't been able to watch the videos all the way through, because seeing what happens in my eyes as I start to get drunk is so painful to me. Like, it's nothing wrong, but it was just sort of like, you could see me disappearing. I was really on it, and okay, here I am doing this experiment. This is so good. And then by the last video, like, I'm just kind of like, I guess it's cool. Like, I mean, drinking's all right. I kind of feel like the room is a little bit spinny, and I'd look at it and it was like I wasn't there. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want my kids to see me like that. I don't want my husband to see me like that. And for me, that was like a big, huge pivotal moment of,
that's an awesome
that
experiment.
Is not for me.
I love that experiment. That's really funny. I feel like there's room to do that experiment with so many other things. Like, how am I really under this condition?
Yeah, because it really isolated it, right? And it said, what getting drunk felt like to me was like the room was getting fuzzy and things were kind of going to a point. And I certainly felt like my senses weren't as together and I couldn't think as clearly, but there was nothing inherently fun in that. Like, there just wasn't anything for me that was really fun about intoxication.
How long ago was that?
That was almost 3 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so then, I don't know, sometimes I'm like I heard one woman who does this and she goes, I do it every year just to like make sure that I'm not missing out on anything. And so, she read my book, she did the experiment, and she does it every year. And she just like, she's like, that's what I want to do, is I want to just check in with myself and see where I'm at, and then I have a guy who's read my book, and he says, this is what I do, is that in the ancient days, 360 was supposed to be, circumference of a circle. And that was supposed to be how many days we had in a year, but we messed it up. So it's really 365. He goes, so I give myself 360 sober days a year and 5 days where I can just drink. He's like, I've only drank 3 days out of the last 365, but I have those 5, and that's what works for me. And I'm like, you know what? That is what it's all about, is like finding what works for you, to find your own peace with your drinking. And there's some women who, they read my book and she's like, I'm 70. I've been drinking my whole life. Like, this is great, but I just want to drink. But I'm at peace about it now because I've asked myself that question. I've stopped feeling guilty. And I was like, sorry, but more power to you. I know that's going to get me haters from wherever, of course.
No, not at all.
Like, more power to you because you found peace.
It will get you haters in some places. But what I love is some of those stories, like the woman that drinks 1 day a year to do that experiment, and the guy who drinks 3 to 5 days a year. We're told those things can't exist, right? Or we're told, well, the reason he can do it is because he's not really an alcoholic. What I hate about that more than anything is if that guy didn't read your book, and maybe he didn't read your book first and went to treatment first. When he walked into treatment, nobody said to him, hey, maybe you can actually just drink a few days a year. What they said is, you're an alcoholic and you're here because you have an allergy to alcohol and it's a spiritual malady and you got to fix yourself. And if he would have gone down that route, then that would be the belief that's instilled. And as I've talked about a lot of times before, the beliefs that you hold are much more likely to play out in life with whatever it is you end up doing. And so having that belief in his head would drive him to saying, oh my God, if I want to drink, there's something wrong with me, I'm an alcoholic, etc. It's almost like by trying your own experiment, and I'm sure that's part of why you put out a book, you gave people permission to say, hey, here's my roadmap. But because I'm not dogmatic about my own roadmap, you might have a variation on this. But here's a suggestion of the work that I've done. See what happens. And then not everybody follows exactly your system. People come up with their own version of it that works for them. And you're not... Look, I don't even know that Bill and Bob would have been this dogmatic about it. I think that's what people have done for them. But you're not egocentric enough to think, hey, what I said in the book was one experiment ever. If you do an experiment every year, you're not doing this right. This woman found something that works for her. It's great.
Yeah, and it's interesting, a few things on that. Like, first of all, the evolution of the book was, I had just literally stacks of my own research and notes. And once I kind of had ended my own cognitive dissonance, I said, wow, I think other people could benefit for this. So I put that out kind of in the worst format ever. I mean, full of spelling errors, full of, like, there was no book structure to it. Yeah. I just put it out on a webpage, and I got 20,000 downloads in 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And so then I was like, okay, now I have to actually hire an editor and like get a book cover design and like go through the publishing. So it didn't intend to be a book. Like, there was no intention there, which was very cool and kind of happened to me. And now, yeah, it is like consistently sells number 2 after the big book, and sometimes beats the big book on Amazon. So it's been really, really cool to see that people are hungry for this, just
and you self-published it, right?
I have. Sorry, what?
And you self-published it.
I self-published it, yeah. And I think people are hungry for the, wait a second, I'm an adult here. I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl. Like, I can be trusted with my own life. Because guess what? People think that anyway. And when we tell them they can't be trusted with their own life, then they just lie about it to us because we've told them they can't be trusted. But the truth is...
Unless we break them down so much that we've gotten them to start doubting that that's true.
Which is so sad. I mean...
It's sad. It's so sad. We do that. I mean, look, there are millions of success stories in AA, and that is true. There are people who quit. But I've met ridiculously miserable people within AA who haven't found any greater peace in life. And the thing they hold on to is, I'm no longer drinking.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, that system has not provided them with enough insight, enough work, enough resolution of the issues that they're dealing with on a daily basis to find joy and fulfillment. They just found abstinence. And so the book I'm working on is called The Abstinence Myth for that reason. Is we've created this mythological power to abstinence as if that is the goal. That's not the goal. You hit it right off at the beginning that we talked. Happiness, fulfillment, and being satisfied with your life is the goal. Abstinence might be one of the tools to get there, but it doesn't have to be everybody's tool.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so powerful. And I think that, at the beginning of my book, my desire was for alcohol to become again small and irrelevant. Like I remembered it being at my wedding in college, not for it to become so pervasive that I was attending meetings, and that I was really kind of making it more important in abstinence than it had ever been, to be honest, when I was drinking. Because when you're just drinking every day before you start to question it, you're not thinking about drinking. It's only after you stop that you start thinking about drinking. And that's one of these ridiculousness of that kind of what happens through that journey.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I just have such a heart for is that, we met, you were speaking on all sorts of great things. And my topic was, what's wrong with the word alcoholic? And it was a pretty intense topic, and I was quite nervous delivering the speech. But for me, that term alcoholic really prevented me. It instilled so much fear in me that it prevented me questioning my own drinking for a very long time. And I had somebody who I was drinking buddies with. She came up to me and she said, I've stopped drinking. I've started to go to AA. And I said, oh my gosh, what does that mean? We drink together. Like I match you drink for drink. Like, what does that mean for me? And she goes, no, I've learned that I'm different. I've learned that I'm an alcoholic and I was born this way and this is my path and it doesn't mean anything for you. And so not only was there this fear around this term that I was so afraid of being an alcoholic, but once I was kind of dubbed not an alcoholic, I took that to mean party, yay, here I go, and it wasn't until probably 4 years after that conversation that I was like, okay, wait a second, this is not what I want to be doing with my life. But I was never in that 10%. I think I've read a statistic that of 90% of what they call excessive drinkers, which is, I guess, 8 drinks a week for women, 15 for men, are not dependent. And it's only 10% that truly fit dependence. And I was in that 90%. And my kind of heart right now, why I get up in the morning and do this, why I've quit corporate life and I've focused on this mission is my heart is for that 90% because nobody's talking to that 90%. There's options for the 10%. There's tons of options.
Unfortunately, people probably are talking to them, but they're labeling them the same as the other 10%. So the system is created to look at everybody like they're an addict and an alcoholic. And people this is one of those things that people argue with me about all the time, and they hate when I bring this up. But people now say to me, because I drink. I used to be a meth addict. I drink socially now, and I've tried other things. Like I've smoked weed a few times. I hate weed. I've tried a few things here and there over the last 15 years. And people say, well, that's because you were never an addict. And I'm like, fuck you. Where were you when I was being sent to rehab? And at rehab, they were drilling it into my head that I'm a lifelong addict. It was because I decided at some point to leave and see if I was or wasn't that I ended up in this place. Not because anybody at any point along the line said, hey, I don't think you really match this. Here's the plan you should follow. And the system is created to look at everybody. The whole thing, right? Like to a carpenter, every thing that sticks out of the wall is a nail, and you're always going to use a hammer. And if your belief is that anybody who deals with alcohol problems is an alcoholic, and they have names for it, right? They have high functioning alcoholic, they have a high bottom alcoholic, but it's always alcoholic. It's always that person who will always have problems and is progressive, and all the stuff they say, your disease is doing push-ups, all this stuff that they tell you that builds this fear in the back of your head of, I better not move, because if I move out of this, or if I question any of this, what they literally tell you not to. They say, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. All these sayings are saying, you don't know anything. Let us tell you what reality is like, and we will present it to you. So you now know, or you now believe that you are in the other 90%. But that's not because anybody said to you in the beginning, other than your friend maybe, oh, you're not like me. If you would have walked into a meeting, they would have very quickly helped you say, my name is Annie and I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah, I think it's really true. And it is such a spectrum. And to, like you said, the nail and the hammer, like, number one, I'm a bit shocked because I've never heard a lot of those things you just said, the cotton and the mouth. And
you haven't?
No, I've not. I only went to one AA meeting right before I published because I just felt like I talk about AA based on, I did read the big book and I talk about it in the beginning chapters of my book as part of my own journey. It was very first person, but I did feel like I needed to go to one meeting. It was an all women's meeting and everybody was really nice and friendly, not happy, but friendly. And so I have very little experience with this world, from a personal standpoint. I've kind of been on my own path. So I'm kind of a bit like, oh, wow, really?
Trust me. A lot of the people who listen to this have heard those sayings before. And by the way, you said something that I want to clarify. I don't think they're doing it out of ill will. It's their belief. And it is a religious-like belief. And so I've stopped having the fights with people about this because it doesn't. I was sober in AA for 3 years. It's just that I decided to leave and life is fine. But I've also never come back to all the meetings I used to go to and said, hey guys, just FYI, I was here as a meth addict and you told me all the stuff and I followed it for 3 years, but then I left and now I'm living totally fine. I have a few drinks a week. I drank more the last 3 days than I have in the 2 weeks before because I was out and traveling and all this kind of stuff. But I'm going to slow back down now that I'm home. But it's all good. I'm actually doing really, really well. I've never gone back. So in the meetings, they think they don't know what happens to the people who leave. For all they know, I died or whatever. So I don't think they're doing it out of ill will at all. I think they firmly believe that they found a method that works. And they will comment on this, trust me, saying exactly that. You guys are a threat to alcoholics who will die because you're telling them that they are not necessarily alcoholics.
And I think that's the thing. I mean, so my exposure to this has been, even before I published the book, I actually had a group of 4 or 5 people get together and ask me if they could have a call with me because they really wanted to dissuade me from publishing, that they thought the message was dangerous and that they thought I was going to kill people and all of these things. And so at first I was really in this like, whoa, like I was just totally shocked. But then, I had this one woman and she explained it to me really well. And she found sobriety through AA, but she doesn't go anymore. And she goes, look, what you're threatening, this paradigm of being an alcoholic, that's what they're telling themselves that so that they will never drink. And they know that if they drink, they are in that percentage of that spectrum where one drink becomes a 3 or 4 day bender that puts them in the hospital and threatens their life. And so by you asking questions, they have to put up that barrier because you're almost threatening the thing that is keeping, in their mind, them alive. And so when I saw it from that, I'm like, oh, that's such a good point, because nobody is coming into this conversation with bad intentions. You and I are not coming into this conversation and intending that somebody listens to this and then they say, oh, I think I can drink normally, and they want to go off and drink and then they end up hurting themselves. Like, certainly not. That is not our intention by any stretch. Equally, I don't think people coming at it and saying, oh, Annie, your book's going to kill people, are coming from the intention, like they believe that. So they're coming from the intention of, and I think that's what's great about these conversations. But I also think it's important for people to say, look, if it works for you to identify with the term alcoholic, to go to those meetings,
100%.
To not watch things like this because they ignite you, then turn this off and protect your sobriety, please, because that is not the intention, obviously.
Here's the one difference, and I have to point this out. As far as I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, there's no court or judge as it stands that mandates that somebody with a DUI read your book and follow the program within it if they struggle with alcohol.
You were wrong until 2 weeks ago. And 2 weeks ago, a judge from Mississippi got in touch with me and he said, Annie, I love what you're doing, and I have started to mandate this in my court, and I would like you to come speak to a huge group of judges, 225 judges at our biannual training to put this more pervasively in the court system. Okay. So yes, yay, like it's really exciting, but you are right.
But so here's what I'll tell you. I don't know if this is your book, so you get to do whatever you want with it, obviously. But one of the things that I would tell the judge is start being wary of mandating a specific method and approach. Because if you mandate it you're going to do the exact same thing that we talked about before. You're telling people they have to do this. They're going to see it in a different way than if you just suggested it to them and said, hey, here are 8 things that you can choose. There's Annie's book, there's AA, there's Smart Recovery. Find one of these that works for you and do one of them. The mandating thing is dangerous. No matter how much I love your book, no matter how much I love what you're doing, telling somebody that they have to do a specific approach. Again, if we know psychologically it's not a smart thing, then we should probably not do it. I remember I went to my, I had a social psychology teacher in undergrad, and we had covered a portion of the book that talked about this kind of reactivity. And one of the things she mentioned was that when you mandate and you have more proctors passing around during a test, cheating attempt rates go up. And then we have our test, and she's got like 4 proctors walking around the room. And so I walked up to her after when I handed her the test, and I said, can I just point something out? This is literally an exam where you ask a question that tells us that what you're doing here with your people who are kind of looking over us to see if we're cheating is not helpful. It'll actually make more people cheat. So why do you do it? And her answer was, it's policy from the school. So policy can get completely in the way of normal logic. And so I think what would be amazing is if something like your book is just made available to people all the time and said, hey, we normally send people to AA or Smart Recovery. There's also this book. You got to pick something, because the power in everything that you just talked about, the power of giving somebody a choice already tells them a different story. And the story is, you're an adult. You can make choices. We're going to trust that you can look at these 3, 4, 7 options and pick one that sounds good. And I'm going to give you permission that if you read Annie's book and you're like, this is bullshit, I don't believe any of this crap, you can come back and choose something else. But you got to come back and tell us that you chose something else.
Yeah, that's huge. That's really well heard. I totally understand that. I think that's a very good point.
But congratulations, by the way. That's amazing.
But you're right. I think even to the point is, if I do have the opportunity to speak, this should be an option. And the conversation we should be opening up is not about this is suddenly the right way. No, this is suddenly the options. And once you give somebody one choice, then they start to make other choices. They start to feel empowered again, because empowerment for me is what got me out of the cycle of giving my power away to the bottle, right? And it wasn't disempowerment and rules. It was empowerment and education that really kind of released me.
So I think that's a perfect segue for what you're doing now, which I think is really, really cool. So why don't you tell everybody about, you are now looking to empower other people.
Yes.
I'd love to hear
so
about
again, our conversation, our 2 hours on the floor over coffee last November was pivotal in what I'm doing now. And it just opened my mind, and I started saying, okay, how can we lower this barrier to entry? Because still somebody needs to decide. We still have a huge problem just asking the simple question, am I drinking too much? So no matter where you are on the spectrum, even if you feel like you just drink too much on occasion, or if you feel like you're drinking too much every day, that question becomes, am I an alcoholic? Which is a terrifying question, and we don't ask it. Yeah. And so what I would like to do is just lower the barrier to entry. So what I'm doing is I've just launched it, and it's called the Alcohol Experiment, alcoholexperiment.com, and it is a 30-day experiment. But unlike things like Dry January, 6 million people give up alcohol every January. But there's no mindset shift. There's no tools. There's no education. So through the 30 days, it is a diet, and it is willpower based, and you're just depriving yourself. So alcohol actually becomes more important and on a bit of a pedestal. So then when February 1st comes, you're like, thank goodness. Let me down a few. And then that cycle continues. But you've also proven to yourself, okay, I don't have a problem because I could give it up for 30 days, even though those 30 days were miserable. By it being miserable, you further cemented the fact that alcohol is key to life. So that approach, well, kudos to people for giving it up. I want to provide education, and Dr. Jaffe is on one of the days. I've involved all sorts of experts in all sorts of fields, and psychology, positive psychology, addiction specifically. And so every day of those 30 days, you get a video and, a quote and some motivation, and it's in a social community off Facebook for privacy reasons, where you can just interact with other people who are, a few days ahead of you, a few days behind you. You get to pick your start date. And it's not necessarily, honestly, if you do this and you don't make it a single day, but you digest all the information, you'll never see the world the same way. So it's really about just, finding a starting place for you, no matter what that is, what that looks like.
So cool. Alcoholexperiment.com. It reminds me, so I'm doing this Ignited thing now, and this is the Ignited podcast. That's one element of that. And for me, it's also about dropping the barrier to entry. And we're going to end up having workshops, weekend workshops, evening workshops, where people who are struggling with drugs or alcohol or related sort of issues can come get information and get started on a path without having to go to treatment, without having to feel like they have to cross over some magic boundary and label themselves something different as an addict, an alcoholic, or something along those lines. Look, I'm so happy that you walked up to me at that conference and talked to me, and we ended up spending those 2 hours. So proud of the stuff you've done. This thing with the court is really cool. And I'm looking forward to seeing, will you come back and tell us how the alcohol experiment is working out and some of the stuff that's come out of it?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd absolutely love to.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, Annie. We'll post all the stuff, all the links and everything in the description for this. And I hope this alcohol experiment goes gangbusters and people are experimenting all over the place.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Ignited podcast. We were so happy to have you along for this ride. Please go and subscribe to this. Leave us a review. We love hearing from you. And if you want more, don't forget to go to ignited.com, where all the podcast episodes are available with show notes and so many of the little details and links from each one of these interviews. And you can look at all the future events that we have going on, all the things that make Ignited so special, even beyond this recording. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week.